All right, we are live. Our fearless leader, Jenny White, has been taken by the thought police. It's finally happened. No, I'm just kidding. Jenny's out today, so we'll be doing the show. We've got Mary from V1SUT on today with even more. It's so wild to just see how crazy things are, and then you report them, and then you just keep digging, and it just goes into a whole nother level. So we'll have Mary on here in just a minute, but I want to thank everyone that is a supporter of ours, a Patreon, all our Patreon subscribers. We can't thank you enough. Even that little $8 donation does so much for us every single month, and I just always want to recognize that and recognize you. And anyone that helps us and donates, we get just regular checks in the mail. Anyone can go to our website, rope2.org. It's right there on the homepage. You can just hit the donate button. You can send us a check. You can pay us by credit card. You can pay us by Venmo or PayPal. So we just can't thank you enough for that support, because it does cost a lot to not only run a show, but just the deep research that we do and continue to do and put out. It takes a lot of time, a lot of money to do that. But all things aside, let's bring Mary on from V1SUT with just another bombshell after another bombshell, which when we left off, and she's going to recap this, but we left off with the Wetumpka story there, but there's been multiple other instances that have come to light here back at Western Heights. So we're going to bring Mary on.
Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Good. It's good to be back with you. I missed being on. We fell during the holidays in December, so it's been a couple of months and a lot has happened.
Yeah.
in just a few months.
Well, it is so we don't want all this stuff to happen, but it just keeps going. It's just like a never-ending cycle. But it's so I'm so proud that we have, almost like citizen journalists like yourself that, who else is going to bring this small little local detail to life that's happening probably in, just to kind of recap for people, because we're going to talk about Western Heights. I mean, this is a very small community. Mm-hmm. It's probably, economically on the downside. It's mostly Hispanic. They probably English is probably not even the mainstay language there. So you just have a community of just hardworking, ethnic people that are just being completely taken advantage of, in my opinion.
You're exactly right. And the thing about Western Heights, they have about a little over 2,800 students. So it's an urban district, but it only serves 2,800 students. Where, we look at others, we have districts that serve 30 and 40,000 students in our state. But they definitely socially, economically disadvantaged English language learners. We have a lot of people who are not legal citizens who are sending their children to those schools, which makes them, in effect, very powerless. And very vulnerable to their kids being taken advantage of. And the school, strangely, you would think that the money would be an issue where the school's concerned in funding, but they spend far more than the state average per student. And their results, which I'll talk about this later, they have a 2% academic achievement score. That's an indicator from the State Department of Education that shows if a child's ready to move on to the next level of education or the next step in their career. It's 2% academic achievement. So they're failing at a level we would have never imagined possible just 10 or 15 years ago. And in the middle of that, there's just a lot of room for people who want to grift the system, people who want to push their ideology, and people who want access to children to move in and to be almost immovable. So that's why we just keep following this story and just keep digging, because it has not been resolved.
Yeah. Well, that's always been, kind of a mainstay for me is, where are these child predators going to be? They're going to be where the kids are. And especially when you take, one thing that really bothers me is you've got a school district like this, it's a small school district. No one's paying attention to it, but that's where they're test running how they're going to do things, and set the precedence. Hey, we've done this over at Western Heights now for 10 years. This is how you kind of infiltrate and get into the system, in these bigger school districts with even larger predators, which I'm sure they're all connected, in rings of who knows what. And I'm sure you'll uncover that at some point also.
Well, you hit the nail on the head, because if we look at just Western Heights, and people are accusing me of picking on Western Heights, this is just an example exactly of the proliferation of lots of different things that are dangerous to kids, including the quality of their education, inappropriate people being near them, all of those things. And you're already right, because we're on step 2 of that. Most of the people involved in this, now we're on our 6th story on Western Heights.
Yeah.
Came from Oklahoma City Public Schools, a behemoth, a massive urban failing district that is steeped with incredibly progressive ideology in their hiring, in their teaching, in their library issues, in all of those things. These folks all came up through the ranks, for the most part, very few exceptions, from Oklahoma City Public Schools. So you already see that the outside money, the NGOs and the nonprofits and things that are involved in our school districts that have changed things so massively start there, and then those people get pushed out into the surrounding area. So don't be surprised when it's in your small town. Yeah.
Well, that's kind of, we see that. Yeah. Yes. We're looking at these pedophile stories, but you just see that with the general abuse stories within coaches and things like that, to where these coaches are in these large school districts, situations happen with some type of abuse, whether it's physical or verbal or sexual or whatever, with another student or another teacher or something, and nothing really. Yes, whoever the perpetrator was at that point may get in trouble, but they ultimately just go on to another school. They don't even stop them. They don't even say, hey, you're done. Your certificate to be around these kids, to be around, education in general, is pulled. You find another profession. But instead, they just keep going from place to place.
Well, and I will say it was encouraging, and I think it's an encouraging point for parents that has been the history. Someone is caught for something, and to get ahead of the scandal, the school allows them to resign. Then their teaching certificate stays intact, and they hop right over to another school district. We see it over and over and over. Yeah. And if we have time sort of at the end, we're working on we're getting to the point where we're at the much broader picture. And we're noticing that those folks who are allowed to skate, resign after some kind of a crisis involving inappropriateness with children, then hop to another district. They're hired by someone else who did the same thing. They're promoted. These folks are not the PE teacher anymore. They're the superintendent.
Yeah.
So we'll talk about that a little bit later. But
yeah. Well, what do you want to do? Do you want to recap? Yeah. Western Heights? We left off at Wetumpka. Are we done? Or we're just done there? Go back to Western Heights? No. Or what do you want to do?
Just a small statement about that. We have a story that's getting ready to come out to update folks about Wetumpka. We are waiting to verify one final last fact, but stay tuned. Stay tuned to the publication. You can subscribe. The address is right there. Visit.substack.com with the I being a 1 at all times. And we appreciate anyone who subscribes, whether it's free and you share our content or whether you support us financially. We want you there. So make sure you're subscribed, because that's coming out hopefully tomorrow.
All right, great.
Verify that fact, but we want to be accurate. We provide a lot of detail and it needs to be accurate. So that being said, I would like to jump back to Western Heights. If you'll go to the next slide, I'm just going to sort of update people in a quick couple of minutes about where we were. So back in August, we broke this story about Dr. Shane Mernon, who's a drag queen, practicing drag queen, works regularly, a couple nights a week at the Boom, which is a gay bar and theater in Oklahoma City. He was previously arrested and charged for possession of child pornography and possession of drugs. Those charges were strangely dropped despite photographic evidence. There were some pretty funny arguments about, can we really prove these kids were kids? And was he really in possession of them, even though they were on his computer, those kind of things. So the charges were dropped, but the final district judge, 3 judges were involved in this. The final district judge said in inside court documents that he felt that Mernon should be nowhere near young children. That's not enough. That is not enough in our current culture. No one touched his teaching certificates. He was being slapped on the hand, got a small charge, misdemeanor for possessing pot. And on he went, stayed out of the system for a few years, then popped back up at Little Axe Schools, which is a small rural district, popped back up at Oklahoma City, where he was for quite a while, and then was eventually promoted through the instructional coaching model as an instructional coach, and then an assistant principal. And the whole time he's working on his doctorate, and he becomes a head principal finally at Western Heights. In response to this story, the OSDE, the State Board of Education, and particularly Ryan Walters, made an official statement. They said they were reopening an investigation into the district's accreditation status, which the district in recent years came under the control of the State Department of Ed, which is nearly unheard of. You have to be beyond bad to be able to be taken over by that state agency in a local control state. They also said they were investigating the district superintendent, Braden Savage's hiring practice and failure to act within the law to protect students, and that they were going to review Dr. Mernon's teaching certificate. I can tell you his teaching certificate, 2 of them, one as a teacher and one as a principal, are still very much intact. So the second story that we did was about, now we're talking about what happens when you put someone in charge of an extremely progressive ideology, especially one that is wrapped around adult sexuality. He begins to hire, we go back into Oklahoma City, as soon as he was assistant principal, he began to hire multiple people who worked at the gay bar to work with children. And this is in an elementary school setting. This is Prairie Queen Elementary in Oklahoma City. And we talked a little bit about the district's reaction to this. So it felt like the story went nationwide. It was covered on major networks. It was all over social media. And you would think that in light of that public of a scandal, that they would have acted quickly. They did not. They doubled down. The district said, we already knew about the charges. That was a long time ago. And it dragged us into a conversation, a needed one, about what are acceptable qualifications and safeguards for a teacher? Is it just having a teacher certificate? What does that background check mean? It means you've never been convicted of a felony, but what else do we need to know? What do we need to know about your lifestyle before we put you in with K through 4th grade children? Okay. Then we get on to the third story. Was about, there was a strange charge, mystery charge out there on Dr. Mernon's record from 2020. And we had to go through some lengths to get that probable cause affidavit, but he was driving drunk in the middle of the night in Oklahoma City, in a populous area of Oklahoma City, with an egregious, I think a 0.23 blood alcohol level, which is 3 times a DUI. And nothing ever came of it. They hid it. You couldn't even see it in the records. So that kind of brought us into the protectionism of public education by district attorneys. What's happening here? Why would anyone drop that charge? Well, the negotiations behind the scene are, if you prosecute him, he's going to lose his teaching certificate. Well, maybe that should have happened, but we covered that story. The fourth story was more about a big board meeting that happened after the story broke, and how outside LGBT activist organizations were there, how there were a lot of teachers in shirts that crossover with that LGBT advocacy groups that were teachers at his elementary school, which was now John Glenn in Western Heights. So you can see that his hiring already has filled the room with his supporters.
Yeah.
And it left us to sort of talk about what are these traits of these failing districts who stack board meetings and silence parents, and what is the role of educators in this? Should they really have that big of a voice in the only place that parents have a voice? We did notice that we covered a little bit about the school board. They seemed handpicked by the district for their ideology, with the exception of one that was appointed by Governor Stitt during the time that the state was overseeing Western Heights. And he seems to be pretty much silenced. The board, like many of these districts, has given its power over to the district. The district is observably running the board. And I'm sure that's something you've seen before.
Oh, yes.
So then that brings us to the more current stories since the last time that we talked about Western Heights. And you can flip to the next slide.
Now with Western Heights, before I flip over there, Dr. Mernon here, there was just so I'm clear, when he was hired, there already was a qualified candidate that was vice principal or something there at the time, wasn't there?
Yes, and that's
Liz Rambo or something. I think I remember reading in one of the articles.
There actually was. In this next article we're going to talk about, we really started to dig into the discrimination happening at this district.
Yeah. Well, and I want to, and I just, before I flip over to that next slide, I just want people to look on the screen, and I want you to just see what does this person, what does anything that's on this screen right here have to do with academics? We already heard from Mary that they're literally at like a 2% academic rate. So all of the charade, all of the pushing of whatever they're doing down there, this has nothing to do with academics in any capacity whatsoever. This is all political. This is all social. This is all reprogramming. This is just basic, in my opinion, it's molestation of children in any and every capacity. Has nothing to do with school and academics. Sorry.
No, I appreciate that, because what we're seeing is they start to hire. And I will tell you, by the time we got to this story, all of these folks that you see on the screen, these are 4 separate men. Sometimes it's hard to tell. 4 separate men are all very much involved in the district. 3 of them work in the district. One is a elementary school para. That's the one on the bottom left. On the bottom right is Principal Shane Mernon. On the top left is Dr. Christopher Culver, and he's in charge at the district level. He's the executive director of secondary education in the district. And we'll talk about a position that he was not qualified for. And in the top right is Dr. Culver's longtime significant other. His name is Dr. Forbes. And in this article, we show just that, the discrimination of hiring, including quantifiably paying more to people of their lifestyle and ideology than other more qualified people. We specifically look at the principal's positions just to illustrate this in one part of the district. And then Dr. Forbes in the top right was actually contracted with the district under a company called EduSkills, under a different entity, to provide services and training and professional development to the district. There was no mention in any of the meeting minutes about any conflict of interest. The entire contract was brought to the school board by Dr. Culver, the man that Dr. Forbes lives with. And the money is going out the door. It was together on 2 contracts, $72,000 plus for 27 days of work.
Wow.
And there's nothing. Boards won't comment on these things. It's an absolute grift. So we really start to talk about in this article, what is this culture? Is it all pushing their ideology? Because at the same time, they're all individually profiting for this as children's opportunity for the education that they need passes by every single year. Another set of kids did not get what they needed. Where will they be in this world?
Wow.
And these people are profiting. So you sort of come to this conclusion that it's about ideology, but it's also very much about self-promotion and money.
Yeah. Well, you know, and just like the old adage, you know, bad press is better than no press at all. You know, Dr. Martin, he probably loves seeing his name up in big lights all over the country. He loves being controversial. And what they're doing is on top of that, you know, they're driving out good teachers and good employees and people that want to be there for the kids. No one wants to be in an atmosphere where now you have just a compiling of these people that just keep coming in. And like you said, where's the money going to be going? It's going to be going to programs, you know, directed by these people with who knows, you know, who's receiving what. You have boards that are completely inadequate that have, you know, no representation of the actual families there in any capacity. So yeah, this is just like a complete untouchable city. You know, so it's like a perfect storm for these people. They get in, they get access to schools, they get to push and promote their ideology on top of getting paid, you know, pretty lucratively through taxpayer dollars.
You're exactly right. If you'll flip to the next slide, we're going to talk about exactly that. Very lucratively. And for anyone who's outside of Oklahoma watching, our cost of living is lower. These are big salaries. So yeah. A little bit about what's happening. The ideology, is it a front for grifting? In this administration at the district, Superintendent Braden Savage has labeled these few people around her as her cabinet. That's a terminology that the President of the United States uses. That is not a terminology that I have ever seen applied to a public education district. It's a culture of incredible arrogance, or at least the front of arrogance. And again, absolutely failing, 2% academic achievement. So to be lofty in their wording and their self-labeling is a little ironic. It's also a tremendously top-heavy district. Few students, yet 29 district level positions. These are not principals. These are not people who are in the school sites. These are district level positions, 29 of them over $100,000. They spend over $1,000 per year per student just for those folks.
Wow.
It's huge. You can look at massive districts like Moore schools. They don't have nearly as many district positions, and they're serving, say, 25,000 students. So this is out of control. Quantifiably, they are discriminating against non-LGBT staff members, both in hiring and in pay. And we look at a case of last year during the big hiring time for schools. They hired 4 principals. And I look at them, all hired at exactly the same time. The one who is heterosexual makes significantly less than the 3 who include Dr. Murnan and 2 principals at the high school who were hired on. The 2 principals at the high school are both lesbians. Dr. Murnan is an openly gay man who is also a drag queen. They make significantly more. So we looked at all of the principals across the district and we compared salaries and got some inside information about who was who. You make 13 to 30% more if you are an LGBT person with demonstrably fewer qualifications than you would if you were within their ideology.
Wow.
Yes, there are already that we can find 2 equal opportunity cases. As you were saying, good people are being run out of the district. 2 of them have been filed about this district, and they're fighting their way through saying, you can't do this. There was a very qualified high school principal that had been with the district, I believe, 6 years, who applied, an assistant principal, 6 years, qualified, had the certifications. From everyone that we've talked to, was very well respected, was kind of holding things together there. And they chose someone from the outside who she happened to be a lesbian and was among those who came over from Oklahoma City Public Schools over him and paid significantly more than the other people in the same position. Wow. And there's one other case that she's not willing to be talked about very specifically, but they filed cases about that. This is happening. We think of discrimination, somehow it's been redefined as against the minority. We have discrimination against the majority and the more qualified right now. So we talked about Dr. Culver, who was promoted within Western Heights to be the executive director of secondary education and communication with no experience, none in secondary schools. He came from Oklahoma City schools, has only worked in elementary schools, has never run a junior high or a high school, yet that's what he's in charge of here. And he makes an excess of his salary package is in excess of $130,000 a year. He's had 9 positions in his career in the last 13 years. So he hops a lot, and we see a lot of that. They're promoting each other very quickly as they're working on their educations and increasing their certifications, and suddenly they're in charge. And Dr. Forbes, his significant other, he used to work at Western Heights in the district, sort of went out on his own, has his own consulting firm, which has another name, but also sort of works the sales end for EduSkills, which is supposed to be supports for English educators as far as English language learners are concerned. The bigger of the 2 contracts that the school district pushed through, and we do know now, this man, Forbes, was working in the district previously when a lot of these board members were still there. They knew who he was. They knew that he was the significant other of Dr. Culver. But there's no mention in the meeting minutes. Parents are unaware of this massive conflict of interest. And yet federal funds, you cannot do this with federal funds, ESSER funds. Those were the funds given to schools to sort of prop them up over the COVID time. And this is the extra funds from that. Taxpayer funds went to this man's significant other. And it was, again, $72,000 and change going in 2 contracts. The 55,000 of it was under ESSER funds for 27 point some days of commitment. That's really good money.
Wow.
Yes. So there's a lot of English language learner grift in this too. Both of these gentlemen, this couple, they're both in this organization. It's the Oklahoma Association of Bilingual Educators or Education. They trade off being the president of this. Culver was, and now Forbes is the president of this organization. So it gives them a lot of sort of clout. They bring into professional developments people from districts all over the state. So they're starting to spread their thing. And in some of the trainings that we've gotten our hands on, some of it has absolutely nothing to do with English language learning. It's very much about school culture and affirming everything. They've traveled together to conferences, went to New Mexico. We have pictures of them in front of the valet parking sign that they post on social media. But Culver is under the dollar of Western Heights Public Schools, and this man is under the dollar of this so-called EduSkills, yet they're together. There are times when they're presenting and training together. This is a mess. This is a huge financial conflict. Wow.
And where's the state accountability? Where's ethics? Where are all these commissions? Where are all these watchdogs? Where are all these groups and organizations, that are there to protect not just the kids, but how our money is being spent? I mean, it's nothing. It's mind blowing.
It is. The piece that I can give you, the district is reportedly pretty arrogant and feels pretty untouchable. And I have a few quotes about that I'm not really willing to share right now because I can't completely confirm. They feel untouchable because this has gone on a while and they've been seemingly unscathed. But I am also told that the State Department of Education, the Oklahoma State Board of Education, is very much pursuing the investigation that they started back in September into this district's accreditation. And you might be able to talk a little bit about this. The feedback that I'm getting, people are very frustrated that they haven't just stepped in and ended this. Fire these people who shouldn't be in the school. Don't let them do this. But in a local control state, accreditation is about the only club that the OSDE really has. And I don't know if you want to speak to that, but local control is a double-edged sword when
Yeah.
things like this come
Well,
up.
and that's kind of what we see overall. And just from my own experience in, multiple dealings with school districts and school boards and kind of accountability measures and who does what or whatever, you see these school districts that are literally untouchable. They're not, they don't work directly. They're their own independent districts. They own their buildings, they own all their stuff. Yes, they raise money through bonds and they get money allocated to them by the state, but they're not actually accountable to anyone really at any other level.
I think you're correct. And the school board, I think we've gotten into a misconception. I think parents, constituents don't really understand that their elected school board can fire anyone at the next meeting. They can fire anyone. They can take action. The district technically works for them with respect to decision making, but that's not what we're seeing. Like in the case of Western Heights and lots of other districts, for starters, the school board members are incredibly difficult to contact.
Yeah.
It used to be that email addresses and phone numbers for elected officials, school board members, were posted on websites. They were very available. You could contact your representative on your school board without ever having to go through the school. If you were having a difficult time with the district, you brought something to them, you weren't getting satisfaction, then you could talk to them. Now we're seeing, even as a journalist, it's very difficult. You have to do an open records request and badger them with law about public records law to get an email to talk to these people. And that's kind of the case with Western Heights from the beginning. No one, not one board member has responded to this publication with any comment or any answers about anything, which makes it difficult. So parents are almost at the point where they're going to have to shake down the doors. They're going to have to be at those meetings. They're going to have to get on those agendas, and they're going to have to run for school board because there really is in local control very little. The State Department of Education, we have confirmed that they're moving ahead with their investigation and accreditation. We may see this district back under state control, which is an incredibly heavy lift for an agency in a local control state. But we can hope for that.
Well, I always try to tell people, no one is coming to save us. We have to do the work. The people of that community, like you said, I know that it's scary. They're just trying to get along themselves or survive. At some point, it's not a wealthy community where you have people with all kinds of time and money to pursue all these things. But ultimately, these school board members are 100% subservient to the school district, to the superintendent. That's just how the whole system has been designed and how it's come to fruition now. And you have the school board members go get their training at the OSSBA and things like that, and they literally tell them, you're I've talked to school board members directly, and they literally say, I go to these trainings and they say, hey, the superintendent knows what they're doing. You just back the superintendent up. You're the biggest cheerleader. You're who the people look to make sure that everything's going okay. So we want you to always, you don't want any dissenting votes. You just do what the superintendent says. And that's what happens in all these districts. You have a administrative team from the school districts who prepare, all the documents and sign, cross all the T's and dot the I's, and they have everything done. So when it's meeting time, it's just boom, 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 boom. You just go right down the list. Yes, doll, this is the greatest thing. You guys do the best job ever. Thank you. And it's complete wash. And like you said, these school board members, what they do is they have removed their telephone numbers and even their emails. And even if you have their, it's very obvious to a lot of us parents here, like in Edmond, during the whole COVID everything, they just won't even respond to you. You may email them 10 times that they won't respond. And there's no way to make them. And even if you try to bring them into a lawsuit or something like that, you have to sue them in their capacity as a school board member, and nothing really even happens to them on top of that.
Well, and that's what you see is so misrepresented when you see the national media acting as though parents have gone crazy at school board meetings. They don't see the 40 steps that parent has tried to take to be heard about something that's a legitimate concern. So when they say it's divisive, it's been made divisive by a process and a structure that has flipped itself with respect to power. The power is supposed to be in the hands of the school board members who are elected by the parents, and it is not anymore. Nothing changed. No rules changed. No laws changed. They just took the power.
Yeah.
That's all that happened. So, okay, I'm going to move on to the latest story, because this is where we start to get
this next slide. Go to 5.
Next slide, which now we're talking about crimes being committed.
Yeah.
So here, just in January, we broke a story, and actually I want to talk about Oklahoma Predator Prevention. They are a group that scans the local media. The local social media and the places where pedophiles seek to secretly connect with children and draw them either into online sexual abuse or eventually meeting in person to physically and sexually abuse a minor. They do an incredible service, and I interviewed them for this article, and they say that they don't really have much to do with media anymore because media is not at all supportive of this effort. They are preemptively preventing child sexual abuse in Oklahoma. I don't know how you can't support that.
Yeah.
But they were following, and they were out on let me get the name of this. They watch multiple platforms, and they were out on something called Tammy, T-A-I-M-I, and it is a dating app for transgender and non-binary people. So I want to sort of get your head around, if there are minors out there trolling around on Tammy, it's because they're confused about their sexuality from having been steeped in it, in this confusion in the world. So these are kids who are already a mess in the head about who they are, right? So they were out on Tammy from October 1st to December 17th. And Oklahoma Predator Prevention was posing as a boy named Josh. You have to be 18 to be on this dating app. But immediately, when a man named Ho Zhang reached out to Josh, Josh told him, hey, listen, I've got to tell you, I'm not 18, I'm 15. And what OPP, Oklahoma Predator Prevention, told me was that that's how it goes every time. They tell them right up front that they're a minor. And he said around 70% of the time, the perpetrator does not back off. It actually incents them to communicate with the child. So that'll tell you about how much of that is going on out there. So he began going back and forth with Josh. And in our article, Oklahoma Predator Prevention gave us all of the text messages, all of the screenshots. This man, Ho Zhang, first gave him a picture of him cross-dressed. It looks like kind of an older picture, if you want to know the truth, because he looks like a very young Asian woman. And then we show how the conversation progressed from there. There were promises to Josh of Josh's PS4 had broke, so he was going to give him his PS4. Then it was, I have 5 PS5 consoles. I collect them. If you keep this relationship going, I'm going to give you one of those. It kept progressing. Hey, just show me a shot of your lower half, like dressed. So that goes back and forth. And then it becomes at shower time, I want nude pictures of you. So it progressed. You can see how a child would be pulled in through a conversation, different topics, a lot of trust. Zhang acts very vulnerable at times, saying he's been hurt in relationships. And then he starts asking about this child's sexual past with men. It's really revealing. For some people, it might be too much, but we feel like everyone needs to know what's going on. So all of those are in there. And then in December, on December 17th, Zhang arranged to meet Josh at a Target store in Midwest City for a, quote, date. And when the child would not send a picture from the video game section of the Target, he got spooked and went home. And that's when Oklahoma Predator Prevention met him there. Now, they met him on his front porch. They have cameras rolling. They live stream this on a lot of different platforms. So Zhang's name has been out there long before we got involved in this story. So they spent about an hour live streaming, and Oklahoma City police showed up. The whole case has been turned over to their sex crimes unit. But then we get into who is Ho Zhang. Well, Ho Zhang works at John Glenn Elementary School in Western Heights. He has been hired alongside Shane Mernon. This would be their third elementary school together, 2 of them in Oklahoma City and 1 of them at Western Heights. Zhang told during the live stream from OPP, he told both OPP representatives and the police that he came from China in 2014. He speaks heavily accented English. He came from China in 2014 as a student. So he used a student visa to go to a college in upstate New York. And his LinkedIn resume says he was working on a master's, but there's no proof that he has a master's or even the degree that comes, a bachelor's that would have qualified him to work on a master's. So we cannot say whether that's true or not. He said that on his LinkedIn. Then he came to Oklahoma and he claimed that he came here for a teaching position. He said he was a teacher in China, that he couldn't stay in China because it's illegal to be gay in China. So he came to the United States as a student and he brought his parents along with him. Then he came from New York to Oklahoma, but the dates don't match up. He didn't find a job in education until more than a year later, but very soon after he came to Oklahoma, he married a man named Christopher Frost. And then in a very short period of time, he was registered to vote as a Democrat in Oklahoma, which requires you to be a citizen. It's very difficult as a journalist to find out about people's citizenship and how they got it or if they got it. But he was only about 15 months married. And typically you have to be 3 months married, living in the same household with your spouse before you qualify. So we're not sure if Zhang registered to vote illegally or if somehow he had special treatment to gain his citizenship. But then he went to work in Oklahoma City schools. He ran into Shane Mernon, and we have a coworker at the time at Stan Wadey. He was at Stan Wadey Elementary School, and he was at a summer training for educators, and he met Shane Mernon, who also worked for the district. From there, they were side by side, being hired wherever Shane Mernon went. Shane Mernon was an instructional coach, and he was hired at Shane Mernon's recommendation into one elementary school. And then he was an assistant principal, hired by Shane Mernon there. And then Mernon jumped to Western Heights as a head principal. And here came Ho Zhang. So we have a child predator who has been following and hired by Shane Mernon, who is a drag queen and head principal at 3 different schools. Here's the killer punch to this story. We cannot find that he's qualified for the jobs that he's had.
Yeah.
The emergency certified and paraprofessional routes to being able to be a classroom teacher seem to have been exploited in Zhang's case. The first year that he taught in Oklahoma City Public Schools, we cannot see that he was certified to teach anything, yet he was a classroom teacher. He continued to be a classroom teacher. Then he got an emergency certification. That expired. He continued to be a classroom teacher. Then he was on sort of a paraprofessional route and would be hired under certain roles and not play those roles. At Western Heights, he was hired as an RTI coach, which is an instructional coach. Now that model is supposed to be you take the very best teachers and you elevate them to a position where they're not responsible for a classroom anymore. It's technically called a non-instructional role. But you are bolstering less efficient teachers, new teachers, you're mentoring them, you're using the data. When he was promoted to that role in Oklahoma City while under Shane Mernon, a coworker said he would not have been qualified for that role. And even the posting for that role from the district says he's not qualified for that role. Well, Western Heights hired Ho Zhang at Shane Mernon's recommendation, board approved, as an RTI, an instructional coach. That is not the role that he was serving at the district. He was a 2nd grade teacher, and parents were not informed that he was not qualified nor hired for that position. And now we know he's a child sexual predator. So this is pretty shocking. I will say that the OSDE did immediately suspend this man's certifications. The district was very quiet from the 17th until that happened in January after the story came out. And then they came back and said that Ryan Walters and the OSDE just put out a statement about this because they knew the district was going to put out a statement and they were preempting them. Let me tell you, they had weeks to address this and they did not.
Wow.
Do you need a minute?
Wow. Yeah. I mean, that is just so, well, to backtrack real quick on the Oklahoma predator prevention, are those like, is that some type are they an agency of some type, or is that just like a group of concerned people that just do this to shed light on these predators like this? Or are they like made up of police officers, or like what? How are those guys?
My understanding is, having talked to them, they are concerned citizens who were fed up with child molestation not being addressed and kids being trafficked online. They organized themselves into this group, Oklahoma Predator Prevention. And I know that there's at least 3 people that run it on a regular basis. And decided to start doing this, start getting out there where the kids and the pedophiles were meeting online and trying to prevent as much as they could. They are an independent organization. They're not associated with law enforcement, but they work with law enforcement in the way that they notify law enforcement in the middle of their stings so that they can come and collect the evidence from OPP.
Yeah.
And then OPP steps back because they are not law enforcement, and they're very clear in all their videos to say they're not law enforcement, even to the suspects. And then the Oklahoma City or whatever police department steps in. They've been doing this for years and have not gotten the media coverage.
Yeah.
I will be following everything they do from here on out.
Well, I will too. And that just shows you, that just goes to show you, Mary, just a very small group of people, that's dedicated. I mean, they look how they rooted this guy out, well in advance of the Western Heights stuff and where it's escalated to now. I mean, they already knew, this guy was a major problem. I mean, we've got to have some accountability. And I think at some point, and you said it just quickly when you were talking about it, this guy at Western Heights was board approved. Okay. So ultimately there it goes. It falls back onto an inept school board that is allowing, the district to kind of bully these people into position. They just appoint them, say, yeah, this is who we're putting in here, even though there's no real history of qualifications. There may be some type of, emergency certification or whatever, but this guy has no business being around kids in the American school system or in education in any capacity whatsoever. Yet he's there and he seems to be untouchable, just like the rest of these guys.
You're right. So when Mr. Zhang, during the live broadcast of the intervention after he had gone to meet this boy and then turned around when he felt it was a sting, during this intervention, OPP, who are incredibly professional, they talked to this man. Nothing was crazy. They talked to this man with great respect, I think, even knowing what he had done. They actually got out a Google Translator to help his parents, who speak only Mandarin, understand what was happening and answer his mother's questions, which I thought was amazing. But they pointed out to him, you told this kid you were an assistant principal. This is how much they're playing with roles. Not only are they playing with roles with the parents and the school board and doing whatever they want, he tells the kid he's an assistant principal. And when confronted with that, he said, no. And he denied being a teacher. And then he finally admitted, no, I'm an instructional coach.
Yeah.
And during the text messages between himself and the decoy Josh, he even invites, one time he's texting with him completely inappropriately while he is monitoring his 2nd grade class during lunch hour. And at one point over the phone and text, he encourages Josh to come to his parent-teacher conference night and lie and say that he's Zhang's cousin. So if you don't think there's an interaction in these people and their access to children, and you think they are able to keep lifestyles separate, I can tell you something else. And then one of the more disturbing things is we ended up getting the police report. The mainstream media takes an interesting cycle on these things. They ignore them. And then when the clamor gets big enough, this story again was picked up on social media. The libs of TikTok had it out there. It was reposted some 3,000 times. So then KOCO and the bunch can't ignore it anymore.
Yeah.
But they put it out there without the details. They don't bother to get things like, they act like they said he was not arrested, and he wasn't arrested on that night. But that's all that they're letting parents know, as though this is unfair to the predator. The truth of the matter is the police report says the Oklahoma City police show up, and you can see that, and you can hear some of their interaction with Zhang on the live stream. And they ask for Zhang's phone, and Zhang hangs over his phone. And right when he opens it for police, the first thing that came up was a conversation on another platform called Discord, and pictures, pornographic pictures of boys, which the police report is very careful to say could be teens, maybe not. Basically, with it engaging in sex acts. I won't tell you the full detail. You can read it in the article if you so choose. That's the first thing that popped up on his phone. And I have verified with Oklahoma Predator Prevention, those pictures had nothing to do with the decoy Josh. So this person is not only out there with Josh, he's out there with multiple others at the same time, actually committing these crimes against children. So they are doing an incredible service in stopping him. And they should be covered more. So this is with the Oklahoma Sex Crimes Unit. They are investigating this. I would absolutely anticipate charges for Ho Zhang related to this. If not for the incident with Josh and what he said back and forth with decoy Josh, for obviously the other materials that are coming up on his phone.
Yeah.
This person's been working for many years with the children of this state in the classroom setting.
Yeah. With Dr. Mernon,
yep.
Who's brought him into the ring here to be able to do this. And who knows, really, Mary, who knows how deep this really goes into, this guy, Zhang, may just be a little, bait that's put out there, in order to start getting things in. And then he's just going to escalate these kids, right up the ladder, right into these people like Mernon's hands in one way or another. It's God, so terrible. It's just completely mind blowing, just how bad it really is. And just to see that your big news stations, your big local news stations here will do whatever it takes to just gloss it over and to not even cover the real details and say, hey, this is happening in education right here in Oklahoma. You better pay attention. The shame, absolute shame on them.
It is. And one of the criticisms that we've gotten by email is that we haven't covered as much, per se, the Kingfisher coaches. And that somehow we're homophobic because we're only covering these people with alternative adult sexualities. And I will tell you this, time's pretty precious and there are so many stories coming at us. We're doing everything that we can to cover the minimum. And it seems like the mainstream media is willing to cover those stories in depth. But if it goes against the narrative, they aren't. And I've noticed child sexual abuse that involves men and boys, like out in Wetumpka, they're not really interested in covering that, which leaves our boys extremely vulnerable. But for the critics, I do want to say about what's coming next from the Visit Vantage. And it really involves some long-term child sexual abuse in public education that is primarily men preying upon girls, and has promoted a power structure through those men stepping down from districts when caught throughout the years and slipping to other districts, just as we've seen in the Western Heights case, and being promoted by other offenders into higher and higher positions. We have an absolute epidemic of protectionism for child predators in our Oklahoma public school systems. We're working very hard on a couple of districts where there's a lot of crossover of these people. And I'm talking about for decades. And it's disturbing. It's coming. Buckle up. There will be a lot coming from our publication on that.
Yeah. Well, and we need that. And not to just say, hey, Kingfisher's not that big a deal. Yes, that was a major abuse issue. But
huge.
But when you're talking about the sexuality, and perversion, and just, you're going to destroy, absolutely destroy kids' lives. And yes, the Kingfisher deal, I know that intimately. But at the same time, that one incident doesn't affect the entire school district at an academic level that is of epidemic proportions. And that's really another part of this is you've got a complete ideology playing out in every one of these school districts where stuff like this is happening. And the academics are just being completely thrown out, for these social programming of these kids. And I just, that's what affects me the most is these kids, they have literally when you look at the elementary level, there's so many basic things that they have to learn to read and write and do basic mathematics. And you don't get all that time back. In the primary education, you don't get all those years back when your brain is built to absorb and to do all that stuff. And it's just so terrible.
It really is. And I want to say at Western Heights, there's still a core of teachers who really care and are extremely worried about that district, who are hanging on by their fingernails. And there are people that have left the district who have been whistleblowers to this publication to let people know what's going on. I think there's no more difficult position than a truly motivated teacher who wants the best for kids who's stuck in the middle of these kind of things. It's extremely disheartening, and they are thinking of walking away. But for what it's worth, I couldn't be more happy to know that the people in Kingfisher were brought to justice.
Yeah.
Over that incident. That was child physical abuse. We cannot tolerate that. And the one thing that you're seeing that crosses over between this case and everything that we're working on in the area of public education and the safety of children is that they try to investigate these things internally when a crime has been committed. Whether you beat a kid in the locker room, whether you sexually abused a kid, no matter what's brought to the administration's attention, that's a crime by law. You should be calling the Oklahoma Child Abuse and Neglect Hotline. You should be calling law enforcement. But they are over and over and over. We're seeing that there's a paper trail of years worth of Title IX investigations saying this was discrimination against this child. No, it wasn't. It was abuse. And that's how they've been able to keep this under wraps for so long. And it has empowered prolific abusers to abuse for decades at a time.
Yeah. Well, and I just want to reiterate, just with my own experience, I've had experience with parents here in Edmonds School District with Title IX issues. And like you said, they have an entire process built, whether it's a Title IX issue, a civil rights issue, just some type of any abuse or whatever it is, it's all done through that internal measure. They're like, oh, give us all the details of this person contacting a child, or this sexual incident that happened, or this abuse piece that happened, and we will investigate it, and then we will decide, how that's taken care of internally. And I can't tell you how many times that if we didn't literally go like with the parents and say, I want the videotapes of outside of this bathroom or on this playground or this or that, because I'm going to publish them. Nothing happened until we made like veiled threats that we're going to get this information, we're not letting this go. We're going to get this information at some point, and we're going to put it out, and we're going to expose what you're doing. I know at one point I was helping a parent who was talking to the HR director within the school district, and the HR director didn't even tell the parent that they were the Title IX investigator or director for the school. They said, oh, well, you just, just kind of tell me what's happened. Well, so nothing happened with that incident. The parent, we went to other measures, and then at the state level, and the state said, hey, this is the Title IX director over here at this district. This is the person who's got to file all the paperwork, who's got to, start the case and this and that. Well, so then we had to come back to that same person who lied to us the first time. Exactly. I mean, it's just so unbelievable. But yes, you're right. You're right. They veil these things inside internal investigations that literally go nowhere. And really all it is, they want to know what's getting ready to come out so they can already be the spin doctors. Exactly. If something's published, just like when we published the bathroom incident with the transgender in Edmond, when Jenny published that through Rope, I had already done an open records request back 2 months prior, so they knew this was coming. They knew how to spin the entire story with the whole birth certificate and all this stuff prior, because they just don't want, they don't want us to know anything. It's so crazy.
No, it's so true. And they have, we'll be writing more about this. All of this is being coached by some of the same attorneys all the way across the state, who are very, very good at this. And those are the attorneys that these districts, as soon as that open records request comes in, those attorneys are involved and they're helping with that. We're seeing during these Title IX investigations and handling these things through internal HR protocols, we're seeing actual sexual predators who are reprimanded in writing, told in no uncertain terms, it's in court documents now, that they will be fired should any of these behaviors continue again. And then months later, letter number 2, we're reprimanding you for the same behavior. Yeah. If you ever do it again, you'll be fired. Up to letter 5, 6, and 7. They have so many opportunities to protect children, and they're not. And then the other thing that we're seeing, the previous administration at the Oklahoma State Department of Education may well have a shelf full of investigations into child abuse, child sexual abuse, inappropriate behavior by teachers that sat there. So there's an investigator, supposed to be an investigator at the Oklahoma State Department of Education, that parents can go to on these things. Yeah. That then takes over from there, so that's the check and balance. Most of the time, that position was not even filled during the previous administration. And parents are telling me that they were told, you can go investigate this and then you can send it to us and we'll see, but we don't have anyone right now. It seemed very purposeful, and that there was no motivation under the previous administration to want to get to the bottom of and to stop child abuse. And I can't say if that was political. I can't say why, but more and more we're learning about these cases. Now they do have someone now, but that's an awfully big job in this state that has an epidemic of this going on for one person to handle. If I were to make one recommendation to the State Department of Education, they should spend the money there, and they should hire adequate investigators to get to the bottom of all of this. Yeah.
Well, if they're taking up all the time, spinning our wheels, doing, not even being able to follow through on anything, then these people win. They ultimately win. Just, they're just going to get another little write-up or another little citation, or, hey, this, we told you, don't do this. Come on. They're just going to continue to do that.
They are. And we're seeing the protectionism of nepotism. We don't even talk about nepotism anymore, about conflicts of interest in hiring. We're seeing ideological nepotism, relational, both of those at Western Heights, contracting with people that you live with, people hiring people for more money that you agree with politically, but has nothing to do with the child's education. But then we're also seeing biological. We're chasing something right now where a teacher had inappropriate communications with a student and was allowed to just sort of walk away because his parents run the district. we really need to get back to thinking that conflicts of interest are real and they can make children in public schools very, very unsafe.
Yeah. And we need some legislation. I mean, I hate to just always add any kind of legislation, anything, but these things need to follow these people. There needs to be a consequence. If you're like 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out. You need to be out of the system going forward, period, in the United States, no matter what state you go to. If you have any kind of anything record of any kind of child abuse, any kind of predatory action, you've been followed by a group like OPP, anything like that needs to stay on their record. They need to be, there needs to be a consequence. We can't just allow this ethos of, hey, it happened over here, just quit, let's go over to this one, because these are rings of people that are connected, and they're going to just continue to build their playbook to figure out what works, how it works, how much trouble can you get in before you really have to, change directions. I mean, they're literally just building their playbook right on us right now.
They are. And that's what we're working on. We're mapping all of those connections. We're moving on to the next level of this. The last thing I would mention, because you mentioned legislation.
And do we have another slide? Do I have another slide for you? Oh, I guess
that's it. And please, people, reach out if you have information about something that's going on that no one else will report in Oklahoma. We want to know. Our email is right there. But when it comes to legislation, more and more on these stories, it is someone who's not just an adult. It's someone past the age of 40 who is busting these wide open, who is a victim. And I've really changed my opinion on this as I've gathered, more exposure to these stories. There's an effort out now by some of these folks to change the legislation about statutes of limitation for child sexual abuse. And almost half of our states now have no limitation. Oklahoma says by 45, if you haven't reported, sorry.
Wow.
You're beyond the statute of limitations. And what we're finding out is that so many of these people, sure, they're just painful stories of struggling just to stay afloat during their 20s and 30s because of the severe damage from being sexually abused during their childhood. And a lot of them repress so much of this to just be able to function. And then when they get to a place where they're more solid, which tends to be in their 40s, then they're ready to fight for other people. They're the ones busting these stories open. And in every case, the abuse is still going on. That person still has access to children, even though they were abusing this person 20 years ago. So I think it's critically important that we change that legislation and allow these people to be the champions to stop this once and for all.
Yeah, I agree 100% there, because I mean, you do see that. You do see, people in their 20s and 30s and even probably into their 40s, they're just trying to survive. And it may take that 20 or 30 years just to even get to a point to where you're like, hey, all that stuff happened to me. I'm not going to let something like that happen, to someone else. And then they have they get that confidence. Their life has turned around into a way to where they can actually do something. So it's not fair that, we have that statute of limitations to where, hey, 45 years old, if you haven't done anything, you're just out of luck there. I agree 100%.
Well, there's a group working on that, and I think you will hear more about that soon. So if it comes up, bother your legislator, and make them vote for it.
Yeah. Well, and we need to be able to personally, we need to drop some personal lawsuits on some of these school board members and let them know we need to set a precedent that their actions are not going to just be protected, the way the whole system has been up to this point. They need to be responsible for everything that happens. I mean, they're the final say so for everything that happens in these districts. They need to be held responsible, just like any corporate board of any corporation. If you break the law, guess what? Those board members are going to face serious consequences, even jail time. So we need that same type of attitude and precedent when it comes to these school boards. Otherwise, I mean, we're completely out of control. We're going to continue to just spin out of control until we bring more things to light, and thank God for people like you, Mary, as a, basically a citizen journalist. I mean, you're not getting, thousands and, hundreds of thousands of dollars in, political money or pharmaceutical money or anything like that, to write, to write these stories. You're out there busting it,
If,
just like,
if
just
I
like
was,
everybody.
if I was getting that money, they wouldn't allow me to tell the truth. So that's sort of the way it works.
Yeah.
But I would tell you this, you mentioned those cases being needed. I think everyone listening should keep an eye on a case coming out of Shawnee. There's a civil case out of Shawnee where the media would have you believe, if you heard about Ron Arthur, who is a pedophile, who was a 16-year teacher, coach, assistant athletic director. And the media would have you believe he was just convicted of basically sexting was the only charge that ended up stuck after 2 DAs dropped the bigger charges, which is really unconscionable. He has been abusing boys, if you look at court documents in the civil suit, for 16 years, and the district's been letting him get away with it. And the media would have you believe that he had sexual contact with one student, only one male student, after that student had graduated. Nothing could be farther from the truth. But if you ask people around Oklahoma, that was the story. That story's going somewhere because someone's filing a civil lawsuit. An amazing detective out there gathered up many victims and much evidence. And now the school and Ron Arthur are being sued civilly because they failed to protect children.
Good for them. And I want to hit just, we're already over an hour or so. Okay. But I want to hit just one more thing, just the hypocrisy of the entire system. I can't even go have lunch with my elementary student because of safety, because of protection, because they can't just have parents in the lunchroom with their kids. Yet, if I was a trans employee, I have all the access I want to these kids. And I can even do bad stuff and just get a slap on the wrist. I mean, that is the level of hypocrisy that we're at here. Just, and if I went, and just as a regular American dad, just like I am, if I go to the park and I talk like this to kids, or if I go to the school and I talk or act like this to kids, I'll be in jail. In a matter of minutes, I'll be in jail. Yet, if I dress up, if I say my gender is different, and if I say I'm a different person, oh, it's okay, it's all okay. I mean, that is just the psycho land that we live in. But we can't give up. And thank God for people like you, Mary, and the work that you have done and continue to do. And I hope that several of your stories have gone national. I mean, I hope every one of these just gets picked up and almost, I hope some of these larger news aggregates can just pick up these stories and just start shaming these people, shaming these school districts, shaming these communities that are letting, well, not so much the community because their hands are tied, but showing light in a way that's just like, what is going on in Oklahoma of all places? I mean, this is the last place you would ever think something like that's happening. And it's happening. I mean, you've blown the lid and it's happening to the 9th degree here.
It is. And that's probably the reaction from national outlets when they reach out and ask questions is, in Oklahoma, we're stunned. We know that's happening here. We had just no idea. Yeah. You just hit on something big. And in the Western Heights story, these kind of districts are really quick to lock parents out of the school. Don't stand for it. Like you're saying, you can't go to the lunchroom, but there's adults coming in and out of that building every single day that aren't parents. Yeah. Western Heights immediately, when the first story broke about this, they locked the parents out of the school. Their excuse was that it was too dangerous for Dr. Vernon, that he was getting threats. They couldn't ever produce any evidence of those threats or any credible harm that was coming to him, but they locked the parents out of the school. If I was not allowed to go to my child's school, my child wouldn't be in that school.
Yeah.
And I know not everybody has that immediate option, but I find that to be a very scary thing. If they're not allowing you to go in unannounced and have lunch with your children and look around, you should be concerned.
Yeah. Well, like I said, thank God for you, Mary. Thank God for the internet, that we can even, publish and bring these things to light outside of the regular, old news source and media channels.
Yes.
Which obviously they're trying to, cover for these situations in any way that they can.
Yep.
And that's sad, but ultimately, we as parents and Christians and conservatives and Americans, it's our job to be morally better. We were one of the greatest countries in the world because morally we were one of the best countries out there. I think people forget that, that we had moral superiority. Now we're literally bottom of the toilet. And I hate that, but that's kind of where it is. Well, anything else you want to leave us with?
No, just stay connected to the publication, subscribe. There are some huge things coming up, and I think it's really important for particularly parents to be well informed. And I thank you at Rope for having this podcast. There is not enough time in the day to be able to cover these kind of things and then have this kind of platform to come out and talk to people about them. I thank you so much for what you do. You've had some great topics on lately. I am a viewer.
Yeah. Well, and your to contribute to you, can they do that right on your Substack, or is there another page? Or
they sure can. At the bottom of every article or there at the Substack, you can subscribe for free and share the content with other people that you think need to know in these different communities. And if you're so inclined, you can support us financially at several different levels from the very low. So check it out. We appreciate everything. And we're never going to turn a profit on this. That is not the point. The point is truth needs an avenue and kids need to be protected.
Well, yes, ma'am. Thank you so much. Your work is so important, and without it, just think, if no one else broke those initial stories, they'd be out there taking advantage 10 times what they're doing. They'd have that much more action behind them in order to do this. At least there's a good chunk of people now that understand that, hey, this stuff is happening. So I know on our side, it's kind of, the truth always takes a lot longer to get a grasp, to get, to get some justice, is going to take maybe years in our case to get legislation done and to get some remedy. But ultimately, your story will bring those remedies for future generations of Oklahomans. And I can't thank you enough for that. So.
Well, I appreciate that. And we will be back every third Wednesday with you all. Thank you so much for that opportunity.
All right. Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Mary.
Every month.
All right. Thank you. All right. Well, that's it for the show today. On Friday, Jenny will be back. I'm pretty certain she's going to be all rested up and back and ready to go, because you know how she is. And we're going to have Linda Murphy on, and we're going to talk a lot of separation of church and state. And it's going to be pretty good. It's going to be really good. And there's probably going to be a lot of things that people aren't going to like necessarily that Jenny and Linda and I are going to say or talk about. But ultimately, that's part of the program. So anyway, we can't thank you guys enough for being here, for supporting us. Always, any donation that you give to us, any news tip, anything that you can do for us is greatly, greatly appreciated. So anyway, until Friday, thanks.